that was the beginning of the end for him.
Famous or infamous, one of the best known people on the planet, ever.
Without a doubt, Michael Jackson's worth more dead than alive. People wanted him dead.
He was afraid something's not right. Michael told me that they were going to murder him.
Michael Jackson's life reads like a Greek tragedy written in neon lights and tabloid headlines.
Now I'm very happy to present the Grammy Legend Award for 1993 to my big brother, Michael Jackson.
A boy who never got to be a child became the biggest entertainer on earth, only to watch it all crumble in the most public, painful way imaginable. His death at 50 shook the world.
The king of pop has died. Michael Jackson, the pop music and dance innovator, passed away yesterday.
But the real tragedy had been unfolding for decades. This is the story of how fame, trauma, and impossible expectations slowly destroyed the king of pop. The lost childhood. Michael Joseph Jackson was born in 1950 in Gary, Indiana, a gritty industrial town where dreams went to die. But Joe Jackson had other plans for his kids. He was a steel mill worker who saw his sons as his ticket out, and he wasn't about to let anything stop them from becoming stars. Michael was just 5 years old when he joined his brothers in the Jackson 5. What happened next would shape everything about Michael's life. Joe ran rehearsals like a drill sergeant, demanding perfection from children who should have been playing outside. Michael later described physical beatings and psychological terror. If they messed up a dance step, there were consequences. The other brothers have confirmed this wasn't exaggeration. This was their childhood. By 1969, the Jackson 5 had their first #1 hit. Michael was 11. While other kids his age were worrying about homework and scraped knees, Michael was performing for thousands, appearing on television and learning that his value as a human being was directly tied to how well he could entertain strangers. He once said he would look out hotel windows at kids playing in parks and just cry because he'd never experienced that freedom. The fame came fast, but it came with a price tag that wouldn't be calculated for decades. Michael spent his formative years in recording studios and on tour buses. He didn't go to a normal school. He didn't have normal friends. Every relationship was filtered through the lens of his celebrity. His father kept tight control, treating him more like a commodity than a son. By his teens, Michael was already showing signs of the insecurity that would haunt him forever. He obsessed over his appearance, particularly his nose and his acne. His father had mocked his looks, calling him Big Nose in front of others. These weren't just casual childhood insults. They were words that would echo in his head for the rest of his life, driving him toward increasingly drastic measures to change the face staring back at him in the mirror. Trapped in fame. The transition from child star to adult artist destroys most people who attempt it. Michael Jackson didn't just survive it, he conquered it so completely that it almost seems unfair to everyone else who tried. Off the Wall in 1979 made him a solo superstar. Then came Thriller in 1982, and nothing would ever be the same. Thriller didn't just break records, it shattered them into dust. It became the best-selling album of all time, moving over 70 million copies worldwide. The music videos, especially for Thriller and Billie Jean, basically created MTV as we know it. Michael wasn't just famous anymore, he was a global phenomenon, recognized instantly in every country on Earth. There was nowhere he could go to just be a regular person, and that's where the trap really closed. Michael had spent his entire childhood performing, and now his adulthood was just more of the same, except the stages were bigger and the scrutiny was more intense. He was expected to follow up the biggest album ever made. The pressure was inhuman. Bad came in 1987 and was enormously successful, but people actually called it a disappointment because it wasn't Thriller. Michael's behavior started getting stranger around this time, at least from the public's perspective. He bought a chimpanzee named Bubbles and brought him everywhere. He started making bizarre claims to the press, allegedly telling reporters he slept in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber to live longer. His appearance was changing noticeably. The press ate it up, coining the term Wacko Jacko, which Michael absolutely hated. But here's what people didn't understand at the time. Michael was trapped in a prison of his own making, or rather, a prison that had been built around him since he was 5 years old. He had no reference point for normal life. His attempts to connect with the world came across as weird because he'd never been allowed to develop normal social skills. Every friendship was complicated by fame. Every relationship was analyzed by millions. He couldn't go to a grocery store. He couldn't go to a movie. He couldn't exist in public without causing a riot. The loneliness must have been crushing. Michael talked about this in interviews, describing how isolated he felt despite being surrounded by people constantly. He was the most famous person on the planet, and he was utterly alone. Fame had given him everything and taken away the only thing that actually mattered, the ability to be human, the transformation. Let's talk about what happened to Michael's face, because you can't discuss his tragedy without addressing it. Between the early 80s and the late 90s, Michael Jackson's appearance changed so dramatically that people genuinely didn't recognize him. His nose became smaller and smaller. His skin became lighter and lighter. His cheekbones became more pronounced. He went from looking like a young black man to looking like something else entirely. Michael always maintained he had vitiligo, a condition that destroys skin pigmentation, and his autopsy confirmed this was true. He also admitted to having a couple of nose surgeries, but it was clearly more than that. Multiple plastic surgeries over the years had altered his face to the point where it looked unnatural. His nose at various points appeared almost skeletal. There were times when he appeared in public wearing surgical masks or with his face partially covered. The public didn't know how to react. Some people mocked him. Others felt sad. Many felt uncomfortable, like they were watching someone self-destruct in slow motion. And that's probably exactly what was happening. Michael's relationship with his appearance had been poisoned in childhood by his father's comments. The fame magnified every insecurity. Add in the resources to actually change his appearance and no one willing to tell him to stop, and you get a perfect storm of body dysmorphia. What made it more painful was that young Michael had been beautiful. He had a charm and charisma that lit up every stage, but he couldn't see that. All he could see were the flaws his father had pointed out. So he kept changing, kept searching for some version of himself that would finally feel right. It never came. The transformation became a symbol of everything tragic about his life. Here was someone with unlimited resources who could change almost anything about himself, and he chose to change the very thing that made him recognizable. It was like watching someone try to erase themselves one surgery at a time. Neverland and innocence. In 1988, Michael bought a 2,700-acre property in Santa Barbara County and turned it into something that probably tells you everything you need to know about his mental state. He called it Neverland Ranch, after the magical place in Peter Pan where children never grow up. He installed amusement park rides, a zoo, a railway, a movie theater, and filled it with toys and games. It was a child's fantasy built with adult money. Michael said he created Neverland to experience the childhood he never had. And on one level, that makes perfect sense. The man had been performing since he was 5. He'd spent his formative years in recording studios instead of playgrounds. Building a place where he could recapture some of that lost innocence seems almost therapeutic. But there was something darker lurking beneath the surface. Michael didn't just build Neverland for himself. He invited children there constantly. Kids from all backgrounds, many of them sick or underprivileged, would come to stay at the ranch. Michael would befriend them, spend time with them, give them gifts. He seemed to relate to children in a way he couldn't with adults. To Michael, these relationships were pure and innocent. He genuinely seemed to believe he was giving these kids magical experiences and unconditional friendship. He talked about childhood innocence like it was sacred, something to be protected at all costs. In his mind, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just connecting with the only people who seemed to understand him. The problem is that everyone else saw something very different. A grown man having sleepovers with children who weren't his own looked inappropriate at best, predatory at worst. It didn't matter that Michael insisted nothing sexual was happening. It didn't matter that he seemed genuinely confused about why people were concerned. Society has rules about adult-child relationships for good reasons, and Michael was breaking all of them. Neverland itself became increasingly isolated from the real world. Michael surrounded himself with employees who depended on him for their livelihoods, meaning no one would really challenge his behavior. He lived in a bubble where his version of reality was the only one that mattered, and that bubble was about to burst in the most catastrophic way possible. The allegations. In August 1993, 13-year-old Jordan Chandler accused Michael Jackson of sexual abuse. The boy's father, Evan Chandler, went to lawyers, and suddenly Michael was facing the nightmare that would define the rest of his life. The allegations were specific, and disturbing. Jordan claimed Michael had befriended him, groomed him over months, and eventually molested him at Neverland and other locations. The story exploded across every media outlet on Earth. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, was being accused of the worst crime imaginable. The LAPD and the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department launched investigations. Michael was subjected to a humiliating strip search so authorities could compare his body to descriptions Jordan had provided. The whole thing was leaked to the press almost immediately. Michael denied everything. He gave a live televised statement saying the allegations were completely false and motivated by money. And there was evidence supporting that theory. Evan Chandler had tried to negotiate a business deal with Michael before going public. He demanded $20 million. When Michael refused, the accusations came out. But then something happened that made Michael look guilty to millions of people. In January 1994, he settled the civil case with the Chandlers for a reported $20+ million. The criminal investigation continued for a while, but eventually fell apart, partly because Jordan refused to testify once his family had been paid. No charges were ever filed. The settlement haunted Michael forever. People asked the obvious question, if you're innocent, why pay? Michael's explanation was that he wanted to focus on his career and his health, which was suffering under the stress. But in the court of public opinion, the settlement looked like an admission of guilt. His reputation never recovered. The 1993 allegations marked the beginning of the end for Michael Jackson as we knew him. Before that, he was weird but beloved. After, he was suspicious, dangerous. The way people looked at him changed. His relationship with children, which he'd always been open about, now looked sinister in retrospect. Everything he did was reinterpreted through this new, darker lens. Michael had become addicted to prescription painkillers during this period, partly due to the stress and partly due to ongoing pain from various medical procedures. His behavior became more erratic, his career stumbled, and the worst part, this was just the beginning, the trial that broke him. If 1993 wounded Michael Jackson, 2005 destroyed him. Another accusation emerged, this time from a 13-year-old cancer survivor named Gavin Arvizo, who had spent time at Neverland. The Santa Barbara District Attorney, Tom Sneddon, who had been frustrated by the 1993 case ending without charges, came after Michael with everything he had. This time, there would be no settlement. Michael was arrested, booked, and arraigned on multiple counts of child molestation and administering an intoxicating agent. The trial began in January 2005 and lasted 5 months. It was broadcast globally, analyzed endlessly, and turned into a media circus that made the O.J. Simpson trial look dignified by comparison. The prosecution's case had problems from the start. The Arvizo family had a history of making accusations and filing lawsuits. The mother had committed welfare fraud. Their timeline of events kept shifting. Under cross-examination, their credibility crumbled. Multiple witnesses testified that they'd seen nothing inappropriate, and some of the prosecution's own witnesses ended up helping the defense. But that didn't matter to the public spectacle. Every day, cameras captured Michael arriving at court, often late, sometimes appearing to be in pain or distress. There were days when he showed up in pajama pants because of back pain. The world watched him deteriorate in real time. He lost weight. He looked haunted. The media coverage was relentless and often biased toward guilt. Talking heads on television debated his innocence every night. Comedy shows made jokes. The man was being crucified publicly while the actual trial played out. Whether he was guilty or innocent almost didn't matter anymore. The process itself was destroying him. On June 13, 2005, the jury returned not guilty verdicts on all counts. Michael was legally vindicated, but he was also broken. The trial had cost him tens of millions in legal fees. His reputation was in tatters, and something fundamental inside him had shattered. Michael left the United States shortly after the trial and barely returned. He couldn't face being in America anymore. The country that had made him the biggest star on earth had turned on him completely. He wandered between Bahrain, Ireland, and other locations, increasingly isolated, increasingly damaged, increasingly unable to function in the world. Financial collapse. While Michael's reputation was being destroyed, his finances were collapsing just as dramatically. This was the same man who had been worth hundreds of millions at his peak. He'd made smart investments, including buying the Beatles catalog for $47 million in 1985, which generated enormous income. So how did he end up hundreds of millions in debt? Simple. Michael spent money like it was infinite. Neverland Ranch cost roughly $5 million a year just to maintain. He had a staff of over 150 people. He spent extravagantly on art, antiques, and bizarre collectibles. His shopping sprees were legendary.
Hi, Michael. We love you, man.
He'd close down entire stores and buy everything that caught his eye. The money poured out faster than it came in. The legal troubles made everything worse. The 1993 settlement cost him over $20 million. The 2005 trial cost tens of millions more in legal fees and lost income because he couldn't work during that time. His album sales had declined dramatically after the allegations. Tours were impossible. The revenue streams that had sustained his lifestyle dried up. Michael had taken out massive loans using his assets as collateral, including the Beatles catalog. By 2008, he was facing foreclosure on Neverland. He was hundreds of millions in debt to various creditors. The man who had once been the most successful entertainer on earth was essentially broke, kept afloat only by the value of assets he'd bought decades earlier. The financial pressure added to everything else he was dealing with. Michael needed money desperately. That desperation would lead directly to the decision that killed him: the final comeback. In March 2009, Michael Jackson announced a series of comeback concerts at the O2 Arena in London. It was called This Is It, and it was supposed to be exactly that: his triumphant return.
This is it. I mean, this is really it. This is the final curtain call.
Originally 10 shows, public demand pushed it to 50 concerts. If Michael could pull it off, he'd make enough money to solve his financial problems and remind the world why they'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But Michael was in no condition to do 50 concerts. He was 50 years old, and those years had been brutal. His body was damaged from decades of intense performing and multiple surgeries. He was thin and frail. People who saw him during rehearsals described someone who seemed exhausted and overwhelmed. The pressure was immense. Michael hired Dr. Conrad Murray as his personal physician for the tour. Murray would be paid $150,000 per month, a staggering sum that shows how desperate the situation had become. Michael needed someone to keep him functioning, and Murray was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, including things no ethical doctor should ever do. Rehearsals were not going well. Michael was missing sessions or showing up unprepared. The show's producers were worried. There were discussions about postponing the dates, but the financial implications were devastating. Too much money had been committed. Too many people were depending on this working. Michael had to perform, whether he was ready or not. Behind the scenes, Michael was struggling with something even more serious than exhaustion or stress. He couldn't sleep. Chronic insomnia had plagued him for years, but now it was worse than ever. The anxiety about the concerts, the pressure, the physical pain, all of it kept him awake night after night, and he'd found a solution that would kill him. June 25th, 2009. Michael Jackson spent the night of June 24th into the early morning of June 25th at his rented mansion in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. Dr. Conrad Murray was with him, doing something that would soon shock the medical world. He was administering propofol, a powerful anesthetic meant only for surgical settings, to help Michael sleep. This had been going on for weeks. Propofol is not a sleep aid. It's what anesthesiologists use to make you unconscious for surgery. It requires constant monitoring because it can stop your breathing without warning. Using it in a home setting without proper equipment is insanely dangerous. Murray knew this. He did it anyway because Michael wanted it, and Michael was paying him $150,000 a month. That night, Murray gave Michael propofol along with other sedatives, lorazepam and midazolam. Michael finally fell unconscious around 10:40 a.m. Murray later claimed he left the room for about 2 minutes to use the bathroom. When he came back, Michael wasn't breathing. What happened next was a series of fatal mistakes. Murray didn't call 911 immediately. Instead, he tried to revive Michael himself, performing CPR on the bed instead of moving him to the floor where it would be effective. He made phone calls to Michael's assistant and others before calling for emergency services. By the time paramedics arrived at 12:22 p.m., precious time had been lost. The paramedics found Michael in full cardiac arrest. They worked on him at the scene and during transport to UCLA Medical Center, but it was too late. Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. The The news spread across the world in minutes. Websites crashed. Television stations interrupted programming.
King of Pop has died. Michael Jackson, the pop music and dance innovator, passed away yesterday.
Millions of people simply couldn't process what they were hearing. The immediate cause was acute propofol intoxication. Michael Jackson had been put under anesthesia in his own bedroom and never woke up. The King of Pop died because he couldn't sleep and because a doctor was willing to do anything for money. It was a death that never should have happened. What really happened? The investigation into Michael's death moved quickly. Within days, it was clear this wasn't a simple overdose or accident. Dr. Conrad Murray had been administering propofol regularly in a home setting, something so far outside standard medical practice that it qualified as gross negligence at minimum. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled Michael's death a homicide. Murray was charged with involuntary manslaughter. The trial in 2011 revealed shocking details about Michael's final weeks. Murray had ordered massive quantities of propofol. He'd been giving it to Michael almost nightly. He had almost no monitoring equipment. When Michael stopped breathing, Murray panicked and made everything worse. The prosecution argued that Murray's actions showed extreme deviations from the standard of care. Any doctor knows you don't give propofol outside a hospital. You don't leave a patient unmonitored. You don't delay calling 911. Murray had violated every rule in the book because he was more concerned about keeping his wealthy client happy than keeping him alive. Murray's defense tried to argue that Michael had somehow self-administered a fatal dose while Murray was out of the room. The jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for less than 2 days, they found him guilty. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but served less than 2 due to overcrowding. But Conrad Murray wasn't the only person responsible. The concert promoters had pushed Michael to perform when he wasn't ready. The people around him had enabled his dependence on medications for years. The system that had turned him into a product instead of treating him like a human being had been destroying him slowly since childhood. Murray just happened to be the one there at the end. Michael's autopsy revealed a man whose body was breaking down. He had arthritis, lung damage, and scarring. He weighed only 136 pounds. His arms were covered in puncture marks from injections. The toxicology report showed not just propofol, but a cocktail of other drugs in his system. This was someone who had been suffering for a long time, held together by medications and willpower. The tragedy is that Michael Jackson died preparing for a comeback he probably couldn't have completed anyway. His body was failing. His mind was damaged by decades of trauma and scrutiny. And the people who should have protected him instead enabled his decline, either out of loyalty, financial interest, or simple inability to say no to one of the most famous people who ever lived. He died alone, unconscious, in a bedroom in Los Angeles. His doctor's last-ditch efforts to save him doomed by the very negligence that put him in danger. The boy from Gary, Indiana, who became the king of pop, never found the peace he spent his entire life searching for.